The glass slipped from her fingers in the smallest, cruelest moment. 1 second it was steady. The next it was falling. Time didn't move normally anymore. It stretched. It slowed. It held its breath. The crystal hit the edge of the table, and red wine flew through the air like a dark ribbon. It splashed across the front of a white designer suit, blooming wide and ugly, like a wound opening in public. A gasp rolled through the restaurant. Forks froze midair. Conversations died mid-sentence. Even the soft piano music in the corner seemed to shrink back. Every head turned. The room was full of people who wore money like perfume, gold watches, silk dresses, quiet laughter that cost more than rent. This was the kind of place where mistakes didn't happen, where everything was polished, perfect, controlled. And now there was a stain, right on the chest of Grant Holloway, the billionaire, the man whose name was printed in business magazines, the man who bought companies the way other people bought coffee, the man who walked through the world like it belonged to him. Amina stood there, frozen. Her hands were still out, as if she could catch what had already fallen. Her eyes were wide, shining with panic. Her breath came in sharp little pieces. She was a black waitress in a black uniform, blending into the background the way people expected her to. She was supposed to be invisible, a pair of hands delivering plates, a voice saying, "Yes, sir," and right away. But now she was the center of the room, and she felt smaller than the floor beneath her. Her name was Amina. She was 26 years old. She worked double shifts. She sent money home. She carried exhaustion in her bones like an old ache. And in this moment, humiliation wrapped around her throat so tight she could barely breathe. I'm so sorry," she whispered. Her voice sounded tiny in the silence. Grant Holloway looked down at his suit, the wine soaked into the fabric, deep and red, the kind of suit that probably cost more than Amina made in 3 months. For a moment, his face was unreadable. Then he laughed. Not a warm laugh, not a human laugh, a cold one, sharp, like ice cracking. "Well," he said loudly, wiping at the stain like it was dirt, "that's what happens when you hire people who don't belong in places like this." The words hit harder than the wine. A ripple of uncomfortable movement passed through the tables. Some people shifted in their seats. Some stared openly, like this was a show. Amina's cheeks burned. Heat crawled up her neck. Her hands trembled. I can pay for it," she stammered. "I didn't mean—" Grant leaned back in his chair, amused, like he was watching a child spill juice. "With what?" he asked, loud enough for everyone to hear. "Your tips?" A few people chuckled softly. Others looked away quickly, pretending not to hear. Silence sat heavy on the white tablecloths. Amina swallowed hard. She wanted to disappear. She wanted the floor to open and swallow her whole, so she wouldn't have to feel the weight of all those eyes. She could already imagine what would happen next. The manager would come. The apology. The firing. The shame. Because in places like this, people like her were replaceable. Grant lifted his hand again, still brushing at the stain, shaking his head with fake disappointment. "You know," he said, voice dripping with arrogance, "I don't understand why they let just anyone serve in establishments like this. Standards are slipping." His friends at the table smirked. One of them, a man with a shiny bald head and a watch the size of a small plate, leaned forward. "Relax, Grant," he said. "She's just a waitress." Just a waitress. The words landed like a stamp on Amina's forehead. Just a waitress. Not a person. Not a woman with a life. Not someone with dreams and grief and bills and hope. Just a role. Amina's fingers curled slightly at her sides. Her heart pounded so loudly she wondered if the room could hear it. She forced herself to speak again. "I'm truly sorry, sir," she whispered. "Please, I didn't want—" Grant cut her off with a raised hand. "Stop," he said, annoyed. "Do you know how hard it is to get wine out of Italian wool?" He said it like her existence was an inconvenience. Amina blinked fast. She would not cry. Not here. Not in front of them. But her throat hurt. The shame was sharp. She could feel the stares like needles. A woman at a nearby table whispered to her husband, "Oh my God, how embarrassing." Another man muttered, "These people are always so careless." Amina heard everything. That was the worst part. They spoke like she wasn't standing right there, like she was air. Grant's laughter faded into something colder. He leaned forward, resting his elbows on the table. "Tell me," he said quietly, but still loud enough, "how does someone like you even end up working here? Did they run out of qualified staff?" The cruelty was casual, effortless, like breathing. Amina's mouth opened, but no sound came out. What could she say? That she had applied to 20 jobs before this one? That her mother was sick back home? That she used to sing in church when she was a little girl, before life got heavy? None of that mattered to him. Grant didn't want her story. He wanted her silence. He wanted her small. The manager began to hurry across the room, face pale, hands wringing. But before he arrived, something strange happened. Amina noticed Grant's hand, the same hand holding his napkin. It trembled, just slightly, so small no one else would catch it. But she did, and for a second, she saw something behind his arrogance. Not kindness, not softness, but pain, a flicker, a shadow that passed through his eyes too quickly. Grant's jaw tightened, like he was holding something back. His laughter, his cruelty, it was armor. Amina stared at him, and her fear shifted into something else. Not anger, not hatred, awareness. She realized something in that moment. This man had money, power, a name that made people bow their heads. But something inside him was broken, and he covered it with arrogance because it was easier than facing it. Amina's breathing steadied. The room still watched. The manager was almost there. Grant was still smirking. And Amina, instead of shrinking, straightened, slowly, deliberately. Her shoulders rose. Her spine held firm. The humiliation was still there, burning, but she refused to let it crush her, because she wasn't just a waitress. She wasn't just a mistake in a billionaire's night. She was a human being. And something deep inside her whispered that this moment, this disdain, this laughter, it wasn't the end. Grant tilted his head, noticing the change in her posture. His smirk faltered. "What?" he asked. Amina didn't answer right away. The silence grew, thick, tense, the kind of silence that makes a room uneasy. She looked at the red stain on his suit, then back at his face. Her voice, when it came, was soft, but steady, and in that softness was strength. "I'm sorry for the spill," she said. Grant's smile returned, smug. "Good," he said. "You should be." Amina held his gaze. "But I'm not sorry for being here," she added quietly. The air changed. Grant blinked. The manager froze mid-step. The tables around them went still. Amina's heart raced, but she didn't look away, because something was about to happen. Something no one expected from a black waitress in a room full of billionaires. And what Amina would do next would leave him completely speechless. Grant's voice cut through the restaurant like a blade. It wasn't loud because he needed to be heard. It was loud because he expected obedience. "This is unacceptable," he snapped, staring at the stain on his suit like it was an insult to his existence. "Get the manager. Now!" The air around the table tightened. People shifted in their seats, pretending not to listen, but their ears were wide open. Wealthy rooms were always hungry for drama, especially when the person being humiliated couldn't fight back. Amina stood still, her chest rising and falling too fast. Her hands felt numb. The wine was still dripping from the edge of the tablecloth, slow and dark, like time itself was mocking her. Grant pointed at her, without even looking fully at her face. "Get her out of my sight," he said. "I don't want her standing here like some kind of reminder. A reminder, as if she wasn't human, as if she was a stain too." The manager hurried over, his forehead shining with sweat. His tie looked too tight. His smile was the kind of smile people wore when they were afraid of rich men. "Mr. Holloway," he said quickly, bending slightly, almost bowing. "I am so sorry. We will handle this immediately." Grant leaned back, crossing his arms, watching the manager squirm like it pleased him. The manager turned to Amina, and his face shifted into something rehearsed. Not anger, not sadness, just the cold look of someone protecting his job. "Amina," he began, lowering his voice, "you know the rules. One mistake, and I understand, she whispered. Her heart didn't understand. Her heart was screaming. Her heart was begging the world to stop crushing her, but her lips only gave obedience. Grant's friend chuckled softly. The bald man with the expensive watch shook his head. Sad, he muttered. They really just let anyone work here these days. Grant's eyes stayed on Amina like she was a problem to be solved. People like her, he said, voice dripping with contempt, should be grateful just to serve. This is what happens when you forget your place. People like her. The word sat heavy, ugly, familiar. Amina's fists clenched at her sides, her nails pressed into her palms. Around the restaurant, murmurs grew like insects buzzing. She ruined his jacket. She'll be fired. She deserves it. The cruelty wasn't always shouted. Sometimes it was whispered. Sometimes it was dressed in silk and spoken behind wine glasses. No one asked why her hands had been shaking. No one wondered if she was tired. No one cared that she had been on her feet since sunrise, that she had taken 2 buses to get here, that her mother was sick back home, and every tip mattered, that she used to have dreams bigger than this apron. But dreams didn't pay rent. Amina swallowed hard and slowly bent down to clean the spill. Her hands moved carefully, trembling as she dabbed at the red stain on the floor. The carpet was expensive. Everything in this place was expensive, even mistakes. Grant watched her crouch there, his mouth twisting in disgust, like seeing her so low please him. Look at that, he said softly, but the softness was venom. On your knees. That's where you belong, isn't it? Amina froze for half a second. The manager stiffened, but no one spoke. Silence was safer for them. Amina forced herself to keep wiping. The cloth soaked up wine, turning darker with each touch. Her cheeks burned so badly she thought they might split open. Grant leaned closer, lowering his voice like he was sharing a secret. You know what's funny? He murmured. I could buy your entire life with the money I spent on wine. The words were quiet, but they landed like thunder. Amina's hand stopped moving. The cloth rested against the floor. For a moment, she didn't breathe. She could feel the weight of his power pressing down, expecting her to shrink, expecting her to nod, expecting her to accept the truth of his world, that he was above, and she was below. Slowly, Amina lifted her head. Her eyes met his. They weren't angry. They weren't wild. They were calm, a calm that came from someone who had been broken before and had learned how to stand anyway. I know, she said softly. Grant's eyebrows lifted, amused. Oh, he said, you know, Amina's voice didn't shake. That's why it's so tragic, she continued, that you still can't buy respect. The air snapped. The table went still. The murmurs stopped like someone had cut the sound. Even the manager's mouth fell open slightly. Grant's smile vanished. For the first time, his face showed something real. Shock. Excuse me, he said, his voice sharp. Amina rose slowly to her feet. She didn't rush. She didn't tremble. It was like dignity itself was lifting her up, spine straight, shoulders squared. The room watched her now in a different way. Not like entertainment, like something unexpected. You think this is about wine, Amina said, her voice quiet but carrying. But it's not. Grant stared at her, as if he couldn't believe she was speaking. It's about how easy it is, she continued, for people with power to forget the humanity of the ones serving them. Grant's jaw tightened. His eyes hardened. You're a waitress, he hissed. Stay in your place. There it was. The command. The reminder. The cage built from money and arrogance. Amina's heart pounded, but she didn't step back. She could feel the entire restaurant holding its breath. The manager whispered urgently, Amina, please. But Amina didn't look at him. She looked at Grant. And in that moment, something inside her shifted. She had spent too many years swallowing disrespect. Too many years smiling through insults. Too many years letting people treat her like she was lucky just to exist in their presence. She thought of her mother's tired hands. She thought of the little girl she used to be, singing loudly in church, believing she mattered. She thought of all the times she had been told, directly or quietly, to stay in her place. And suddenly, she realized something. Grant Holloway had money, but he did not have power over her soul. He did not get to define her worth. Amina's voice softened even more, but it was dangerous in its steadiness. My place, she said, is wherever I stand with dignity. Grant's eyes narrowed. The manager looked like he might faint. The diners were frozen, caught between fascination and fear. Grant leaned forward, his voice low. You have no idea who you're talking to, he said. Amina held his gaze. I know exactly who I'm talking to, she replied. A man who thinks wealth makes him bigger than everyone else. Grant's face darkened. His friend muttered, This is insane. Grant's hands curled into fists. You will apologize, he said through his teeth. Amina paused. The whole room waited. This was the moment they expected her to break. To bow, to beg, to cry, because that's what underdogs were supposed to do. But Amina didn't. Instead, she took a slow breath, and in that breath was a decision. She wasn't going to beg. She wasn't going to cry. She wasn't going to shrink. If this was the moment her job ended, then so be it. But she would not let it end with her dignity on the floor. Grant stared at her, waiting for submission. Amina turned slightly, her eyes scanning the room, the faces full of judgment, curiosity, indifference. And then she did something no one expected. Something that didn't belong in the script they had written for her. Her hands loosened at her sides. Her expression became strangely peaceful. And without another word, Amina stepped away from the table. Not running, not fleeing, walking with purpose. Walking like someone who was about to remind the world that a waitress could still carry a storm inside her, and whatever she was about to do next would change the room forever. Amina walked away from the table with slow steps, not rushed, not shaken, not running like Grant wanted her to. The restaurant watched her move through the space like a shadow, becoming real. Her apron still hung at her waist. Her hands were empty now, but something heavy was building inside her chest. Grant scoffed loudly, leaning back in his chair, as if the entire moment amused him. Running away? He called after her. Typical. His friends chuckled. The bald man shook his head. She'll be gone by tomorrow, he muttered, sipping his drink like nothing mattered. But Amina didn't run. She didn't flee the room. She didn't disappear the way they expected her to. Instead, she kept walking, straight past the kitchen doors, straight past the manager's trembling hands, straight toward the far corner of the restaurant where a grand piano sat under a soft golden light. The pianist was an older man with silver hair and tired eyes. His fingers had been playing gentle background music all night, the kind of sound rich people barely noticed. He was part of the decor like candles and crystal glasses. Amina approached him quietly. She leaned down and whispered something. The pianist's hand stopped. He looked up at her, confused. His brows pulled together, as if he hadn't heard correctly. Amina whispered again, softer this time. For a moment, the man hesitated. His eyes flicked toward the manager, toward Grant, toward the room full of wealthy strangers. This was not the kind of place where waitresses asked for anything. But then the pianist saw Amina's face. Not anger, not chaos, just a calm sadness, a steady courage. Slowly, he nodded. His fingers returned to the keys. A soft chord filled the air. The restaurant grew quieter, confused by the sudden shift. Conversation slowed. People turned their heads. Amina stepped into the open space between tables, where servers usually hurried past with plates. Now it was empty, like a stage no one had asked for. The manager rushed forward, panic all over his face. Amina, stop, he whispered harshly. Please, don't do this. You'll make it worse. Amina raised a hand, not in anger, in peace. I just want 1 minute, she said. Her voice trembled, but it carried. It reached the nearest tables. It reached the farthest corners. Grant leaned forward, eyes narrowed, amused again. Oh, this should be good, he laughed. The room held its breath. Some people smiled, expecting a breakdown. A waitress losing her mind. A scene. Something to talk about later over dessert. Amina closed her eyes. The piano played softly beneath her, like a heartbeat. And then she began to sing. Not casually, not politely, not like a little performance for tips. She sang like someone opening a door that had been locked for years. The first note was low, trembling, almost fragile. But it grew. It rose. It filled the room. Her voice was deep, aching, powerful. It carried pain like a river carries weight. It carried hope like light breaking through clouds. It wasn't a waitress singing. It was an artist waking up. Conversations died instantly. Forks lowered. Chairs turned. Eyes widened. The rich diners who had been smirking now stared, as if they were seeing something impossible. Amina's voice wrapped around the restaurant, climbing the walls, sinking into the crystal chandeliers, vibrating through the silence. The manager froze, his mouth slightly open. Grant's smile faded. He sat still, like someone had suddenly pressed pause on his world. The sound hit him in a place he didn't expect, a place money couldn't protect. His throat tightened, because it wasn't just singing. It was memory, a funeral, a cold church, a woman lying still in a coffin. His mother, Grant Holloway's mother, had once hummed songs like this when he was a child. Soft melodies in the kitchen before life hardened him, before sickness took her voice, before death took her completely. He remembered sitting at the foot of her bed, hearing her whisper a tune even when she could barely breathe. He hadn't thought about that in years. He had buried it under deals and wealth and arrogance. But Amina's voice dug it up. The notes carried sorrow, but they also carried strength. The kind of strength that comes from surviving. The kind of strength that doesn't ask permission. Amina sang like she was telling the story of every unseen person who had ever been told to stay small. Her voice trembled with emotion, but it never broke. And the room listened. Even the ones who didn't want to. Even the ones who thought they were above her. Grant's friends stopped laughing. The bald man's drink hovered near his lips, forgotten. A woman at a nearby table blinked fast, her eyes suddenly wet. The song wasn't in a language of wealth. It was in a language of humanity. Amina opened her eyes mid-song, and for a moment, she looked directly at Grant, not accusing, not begging, just showing him that she was real, that she carried a life inside her, that she was more than a uniform. Grant's chest felt strange, tight, like something inside him was cracking. He didn't understand why his eyes burned. He didn't understand why he couldn't look away. The piano swelled beneath her voice. The final note rose like a prayer. And then, silence. The song ended, but the air didn't move. It was as if the restaurant itself had been stunned into stillness. No one clapped right away. No one spoke. The silence was heavy, sacred. Amina stood there, breathing softly, her hands at her sides. Her face was calm, but her eyes shone with something deep. Then, a single clap, one sharp sound cutting through the quiet. An elderly man stood slowly near the back of the room. He wore a simple suit, not flashy, not loud. His face was lined with age and wisdom. He clapped again. "That voice," he said, loud enough for everyone to hear, "is extraordinary." More claps followed, hesitant at first, then growing. People stood. Some looked ashamed. Some looked amazed. The applause filled the restaurant like rain after drought. Grant did not clap. He couldn't. His hands felt frozen. His billionaire mask had cracked. Because for the first time tonight, he wasn't looking at a waitress. He was looking at a human being. Amina stepped forward slightly, her voice softer now. "You laughed at me," she said. The room quieted again. Her words were not sharp. They were honest. "But you don't know what people carry," she continued. "You don't know what it costs to stand here and serve with a smile when your life is heavy." Grant swallowed hard. His mouth opened. No words came. Amina's gaze stayed steady. "I spilled wine," she said, "but you spilled something too. You spilled disrespect. And that stain is harder to wash out." Grant's eyes flickered. His pride wanted to fight back. But something deeper was louder. Shame. Memory. The sudden understanding that his wealth had not made him bigger. It had made him blind. He looked around and realized everyone had seen him. Not as powerful. As small. Amina's voice softened. "We are all carrying something," she whispered. "And you never know who someone is until you stop looking down." Grant's throat tightened again. He couldn't speak. For the first time in years, Grant Holloway felt small. Not because someone insulted him, but because someone reminded him of what he had lost. his humanity. And in that moment, the billionaire who thought he owned the room was completely speechless. And the silence that followed felt like the beginning of something he could not control. Grant stood slowly. The room was still. His white designer suit was stained red across the chest. But somehow, that stain looked small now compared to the one inside him. Pride, arrogance, cruelty. Those were harder to wash away than wine. He cleared his throat. The word came out broken, unfinished, like his voice didn't know how to apologize. The entire restaurant waited. People leaned forward without realizing it. A billionaire apologizing was rarer than gold. Men like Grant Holloway did not say sorry. They made others say it for them. Grant's hands hovered at his sides. He looked around, and for the first time, he saw the faces in the room clearly, not as an audience, not as admirers, as witnesses. He swallowed hard. I was cruel, he admitted. The words fell into the silence like stones. A few gasps escaped. Grant's voice was rough, stripped of its usual sharp confidence. Not because of the wine, he continued, shaking his head slowly, but because I thought money made me above everyone. His eyes flickered toward Amina. She stood near the piano, her apron still tied around her waist, her hands calm now, her face quiet. She wasn't smiling. She wasn't proud. She was simply there. Human. Amina's eyes softened slightly, though the hurt still lived behind them. Pain doesn't disappear just because someone finally notices it. Grant looked away for a moment, like he couldn't bear what he saw in her gaze. Then he turned sharply toward the manager. She's not fired, Grant said firmly. The manager blinked, stunned. And Mr. Holloway, Grant raised a hand. No, he said. In fact, she deserves more than this place can offer. The manager's mouth opened, then closed again. He didn't know what to do with a billionaire who wasn't demanding punishment. The diners murmured again, but this time the whispers were different. He's defending her? What happened? Grant's friend sat frozen. The bald man looked uncomfortable, like the world had tilted slightly off balance. Grant exhaled, his shoulders lowering. For the first time tonight, he looked tired. Not tired from work, tired from himself. He glanced at Amina again, and slowly, he reached into his wallet. The movement was automatic. The billionaire's solution to every problem. Money, a thick stack of bills. Enough to cover the suit. Enough to cover the meal. Enough to cover her silence. He pulled it out, then stopped. His fingers tightened around it, then loosened. No, he said quietly. Not charity. Not payment. Not a way to erase what he had done. He slid the wallet back into his pocket. Grant looked at her differently now. Not like a servant. Not like an object. Like a person standing in front of him. What do you want? He asked softly. The question surprised the room. It surprised Amina too. She blinked, her throat tightening. No one ever asked her that. Not really. People asked her what she wanted to drink, what she wanted to order, what she wanted to clean, but not what she wanted for her life. Amina swallowed. She began, then paused. Her voice came out small. I wanted to go to music school once. The words hung in the air, fragile. Grant's face shifted, something deep moving behind his eyes. But life, Amina continued, her voice quieter, got heavy. She didn't explain everything. She didn't have to. Life got heavy meant bills. It meant sickness. It meant responsibility. It meant dreams put in a box and shoved into the back of the soul because survival came first. Grant nodded slowly, as if he understood more than he wanted to admit. He thought of his own mother. Her humming, her voice fading. How he had promised himself he would never be powerless again, and how that promise had turned him into someone cruel. Grant took a step closer, careful, like he didn't want to frighten her. Then let me help lift it, he said. Amina's eyes narrowed slightly, cautious. Grant shook his head quickly. Not because I'm rich, he added, but because I was wrong. Those words were different. They weren't polished. They weren't performative. They were honest. The room felt warmer somehow, like a door had opened. Amina stared at him for a long moment. She didn't forgive him instantly. Forgiveness isn't instant, but she saw something in his face now. A man realizing his own emptiness. Grant turned toward the elderly man who had clapped first. Sir, Grant said, voice respectful, do you know anyone in the music world? The old man smiled gently. I do, he said, and that young woman has a gift that should not be buried. Grant nodded. Then please, he said, help her. The manager stood frozen, still unsure if this was real. Amina's hands trembled slightly now, not from humiliation, but from disbelief. Grant looked at her one last time. I can't undo what I said tonight, he admitted, but I can choose who I become after it. Amina's voice was barely a whisper. Then choose wisely. Grant's eyes lowered. I will, he said. The restaurant slowly returned to motion, but nothing was the same. Plates were still on tables. Wine still filled glasses. But something invisible had shifted. Amina walked back toward the kitchen, her heart pounding, her mind spinning. Grant sat back down, but his friends no longer looked impressed. They looked uncertain, because they had just watched power bow to dignity. And they didn't know what to do with that. Weeks passed. The world outside the restaurant kept moving. People kept working. Bills kept coming. Life stayed heavy. But something had changed. Amina received a letter. A real letter. An audition. A scholarship. A chance. The elderly man had connections. Grant had made calls. Doors that were locked had opened. Not because she begged, but because her voice demanded to be heard. And one evening, under bright stage lights, Amina stood in a gown instead of an apron. Her hands were steady. Her heart was full. The theater was packed. People sat shoulder to shoulder, waiting. When she began to sing, her voice rose like a sunrise. It moved through the crowd, touching strangers in places they forgot existed. Some people cried without knowing why. Some people closed their eyes, letting the sound remind them they were alive. And in the back of the room, sitting quietly in the shadows, was Grant Holloway. No cameras, no applause for him, just silence. He watched her with a face that had changed, not softened by wealth, softened by humility. He didn't look like a billionaire in that moment. He looked like a man learning that money could buy many things, but not meaning, not redemption, not humanity. When performance ended, the crowd erupted in applause. Amina bowed, tears shining in her eyes. And Grant, he stayed seated, hands clasped, throat tight, because that night in the restaurant had taught him something no fortune ever could. The measure of a person isn't their power. It isn't their name. It isn't the suit they wear. It's how they treat the powerless. And sometimes the ones we look down on are the very ones meant to lift us up. In the quiet after pride breaks, that is where redemption begins.